Harker was the very first fort after Fort Riley. We were the first fort of these frontier forts out on the Kansas Prairie. And we were known as the gateway post of the frontier. So everybody and anybody who you hear of from these other forts out here, like Fort Wallace or Fort Dodge or whatnot, came through Fort Harker first. We actually started as Fort Ellsworth, a mile south of where we currently are located. We were located right on the river crossing of the military road that ran between Fort Riley and Fort Lauderdale across the Smoky Hill River. And it was called Fort Ellsworth. That fort flooded all the time, being right there at their river crossing. And it was a very poor location, just sod buildings and so forth. And in 1866, the name was changed to Fort Harker. And then in 1867, they moved that fort 1 mile to the northeast. And the reason they moved it is because they wanted it to be closer to the railroad that was coming in. Fort Harker had a total of 81 buildings on that side. Currently at Fort Harker, the Fort Harker Guardhouse Museum, we have 4 of the original buildings still standing. 3 of those are part of the museum complex. One of them is a private residence. And he gets a little angry whenever I take people to this. So we have 3 of the original buildings. We have the guardhouse, 1 junior office building. Now, those 4 buildings that are still standing, the reason they're still standing is because they were made of stone. They were made of Dakota sandstone. Dakota sandstone isn't your typical sandstone. Who has taken a piece of sandstone and rubbed on it and ended up with a handful of sand? You know what regular old sandstone is like. Well, Dakota sandstone is very coarse and it's made of iron ore and quartz and other harder minerals. So you can rub on it until the cows come home and all you're going to have is bloody fingertips. And Dakota sandstone is very dense and it makes it very heavy. It's so heavy they could only carry 2 of those stones per wagon load. And they couldn't even lift those stones into the back of the wagon. They had to line the stones up on the ground, pull the wagons over the top of those stones and ratchet them up to the wagon. And being quarried 9 miles to the northeast, well, it took a while to get those 2 stones to the location, and it took an awful lot of wagon loads to build a 5-stone building. And one of those buildings is a 2-story building. The walls are 2 foot thick, and the walls go down into the ground 4 foot. Our connection with the Santa Fe Trail itself, which was 26 miles to the south of us, is that we would take wagons down to Fort Zara, which was actually located on the Santa Fe Trail to the southwest of us, about 40 miles. And at that location, we would pick up freight that came up off Santa Fe. And then bring it to Fort Harker, and then we would put them on trains, and they would be taken back east to Fort Riley. And in return, freight from Fort Riley would come to Fort Harker via the train, and then we would offload that freight and take it to Fort Zara to be sent on to the southwest. In 1869, we changed our role at Fort Harker from a fort of protection to a supply depot, and we were supplying every fort to the west. So we were supplying Fort Zara, Fort Larned, Fort Dodge, Fort Aubrey, Fort Wallace, and Fort Hays here in Kansas. We were supplying Fort Sedgwick and Fort Lyons in Colorado Territory, Fort Union in New Mexico Territory, and an unnamed fort in the Texas Panhandle. Plus all the hundreds of 1- and 2-man outposts scattered amongst all those forts for getting their supplies from Fort Harker. Our population is 69. How many troops and people do you think were at Fort Harker in 1869? Anybody want to guess? 100 or so? More like or so. We had 1,000 troops and 1,400 civilian employees. Most of the civilians are Teamsters. Who knows what a Teamster is?
Is it supplier?
He was the wagon driver. Today, Teamsters are referred to as truck drivers. So, at Fort Harker, there were 81 buildings, and like I said, in 16, over 1,000 troops. We had up to 4 companies of troops at Fort Harker at all times, and a company consisted of anywhere from 80 to 120 men. Any questions? Come on, you're a smart group. Surely you got questions. Don't be shy. If you don't, okay.
How many forts?
How many forts? In Kansas? Well, you had Fort Leavenworth, Fort Riley, and Fort Scott. They were all back east. You had Fort Harker, Fort Zara, Fort Larned, Fort Dodge, Fort Aubrey, Fort Wallace, and Fort Hays here in Kansas. So how many did that go? Okay. So what you holding? 10 forts. Now, Fort Aubrey and Fort Zara were not there for a long time. 2 to 3 years at a time. I think Fort Zara was actually there 4 years. Fort Harker was only there, if we include the time, that it was Fort Ellsworth to the south of us, just a mile. It was only there 10 years. And the main reason for that is that by 1870, the railroad has made it all the way to Denver. The Santa Fe Railroad has made it all the way down to Fort Dodge. And most of the Indian problems, which the government thought we were having, were further east, or further west, I'm sorry, out into Colorado and Wyoming and Montana and Arizona and New Mexico and Texas. So they started closing the country.
What was the purpose of having the forts to begin with?
We were there as a protection for the incoming settlers. We also protected the stage line that was coming across the state. We also protected the railroad and the railroad workers. And then,
what were the threats? What were they threatened by?
Indians. There were 6 major tribes in this region here that was usually basically their hunting ground. The only ones that were actually in our area that actually lived there rather than hunting was the Pawnee. But there was the Kiowa, the Comanche, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Pawnee, and the Sioux. So we were there to protect the settlers and the railroad contractors, the stage line. We also supported the Fort Larned and Fort Zara in protecting the Santa Fe Trail for the south.
Now, when you had the freight wagons hauling goods back and forth, there were outlaws.
There were outlaws,
yeah.
So we were protecting them from that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergeant Heller.
Take care, Sergeant.